This video is brought to you by Gamefly.com. You can rent 8,000 new releases and classics on most major systems, all delivered right to your mailbox. If you use this URL to sign up for a free 30-day trial, you can test out their service and help support my channel. The link is in the description, so go check it out. Today, we'll be taking a look at Mirror's Edge Catalyst on the PS4 and the Potato Masher. If you don't know, the Potato Masher is a $375 PC custom built in 2014 and designed to compete with the PS4 for the rest of its life cycle. The goal is not to pick on consoles, but to show that PC gaming can be just as good or better for the same money. This may also be useful information for anyone gaming on a budget PC who's considering buying this game. You can also check out my test of the game on the Potato Masher Pro, my side project that competes against the PS4 Pro. Okay, let's get to it. Mirror's Edge Catalyst is an interesting game from a technical standpoint. It has a very clean aesthetic, but it's still fairly demanding. It runs slightly worse than Battlefield 1 or some other high-profile Frostbite games on both the Masher and PS4. The PS4 runs at 900p and 60 FPS with frequent drops into the upper 50s and more rare drops into the high 40s and mid 50s. The game is fairly CPU intensive, which is a weak point for the PS4, so that makes sense. Here I'm running the Masher at 1080p and medium settings with 95% resolution scaling and a fairly consistent 60 FPS with a few drops into the mid-50s. Here are the exact settings I'm using. Mirror's Edge High is really the mid-level preset in case you're wondering why the settings look like they do. As for the 95% resolution scaling, it provides a few extra FPS that help me get consistent performance and there's no discernible difference in image quality. Here's the game at 100% and here it is at 95%. Other than variances in aliasing shimmer due to the camera moving, they are functionally identical. This is where resolution scaling is really helpful. For the rest of this video, assume that any 1080p clips are at 95% resolution scaling. Any other resolutions are native unless I say otherwise. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and unfortunately it's not in a positive way. Mirror's Edge looks very soft on the PS4. It looks pretty soft on the Masher too. I'm not thrilled with either, but the Masher does have an edge because of its higher resolution. Even though both the Masher and PS4 are soft and appear to have a lot of temporal anti-aliasing, there's still a lot of visible jaggy and shimmery edges. I can't remember another recent AAA game that seems to have this bad of a combination of resolution and aliasing on the PS4. It's odd because there have been other games on variants of the same engine, like Battlefront, that have also been 900p on the PS4 and they looked fine. There are no standalone AA options on PC, so the AA is controlled by the other visual settings. Turn the other settings down, especially post-processing, and you get a sharper image but with much more aliasing, as you'll see in a minute. Moving on from resolution, the Masher has higher levels of anisotropic texture filtering and ambient occlusion. I don't think this game's ambient occlusion is very good looking though, so that's not much of a bonus. The Masher also has a greater level of detail and higher mesh and object geometry. In most cases, it just complements the slightly higher resolution for a crisper picture. In some scenes, like this city vista, the difference is pretty large. At first glance, it looks like the PS4 is at a different time of day, but the clouds are in the same place in the sky as is the sun. That doesn't necessarily mean anything because the game could just be faking the skybox, but it does look like there's a lot more going on down on the streets on the Masher. In a few scenes, the Masher also appears to have more aggressive bloom lighting. I don't know that more aggressive is automatically better, but it's there. In this scene, you can also see the PS4's shadow on that seat is a little better looking. In most cases, shadows appear identical on both platforms in every other comparison I did for the game, so my guess is that the dynamic GPU memory restriction feature on the PC version is responsible for this. You'll remember something similar happened in Battlefield 1 with a few select textures. So the takeaway is that while neither platform is as crisp or detailed as I'd expect from mid-2016 AAA release, the Masher does have an edge. That's only part of the story on PC, so let's look at some other settings. At the same visual settings I was running at 1080p, I dropped the resolution to native 900p and unlocked the frame rate. The game is very CPU heavy and the frame rate stayed between 65 and 80 FPS. Not good enough to take advantage of a high refresh rate monitor, and certainly not worth the trade-off compared to the 1080p settings I was running in the last section. At 900p and low settings, the frame rate is able to stay above 100 FPS most of the time, and both the CPU and GPU are fairly maxed out. This could be nice for an 144Hz monitor. With the settings this low, the game is actually a bit sharper, presumably because there's less temporal anti-aliasing. However, the jaggies are now everywhere and that looks really bad. Shadow resolution is laughably low and there is shimmer everywhere. I wouldn't play the game like this unless I was trying to set some record times in the speedrun sections where the reduced input latency could make a big difference. I I feel really bad for anyone playing this on Xbox One because they're playing it at 720p. So high frame rates are a little bit of a disappointment, but how about lower ones? Here's the game at 1080p, very high settings, and locked at 30 FPS. You'll still notice the GPU memory restriction stepping in and making some shadows look jaggy, but overall the game is still very playable. I prefer 60, but at these settings the game is a bit crisper and cleaner and the overall aesthetic is improved. Whether or not that's worth the trade-off is up to you, but it's an option. Let's look at some higher resolutions. At native 1440p and the same medium settings I used before, except resolution scaling, the Masher runs the game at a capped 30 FPS. At this resolution, Mirror's Edge starts to look much better. The difference is harder to see in a YouTube video, but most of my complaints about the game at 1080p go away. Of course, the frame rate is only 30 now, but on a purely visual level, 1440p is a huge improvement. Dropping to low settings and 80% resolution scaling, the Masher can also hit 60 FPS. This is more pixels than 1080p and it shows, but the aliasing is back to a lesser extent and shadow resolution is once again laughably bad. Still, this is a decently acceptable compromise if you think 1080p is too soft. With the exception of shadow resolution, I do prefer this combination to 1080p. Now, for a bit of a surprise, I almost didn't bother testing the game at 4K because I was sure it wasn't going to scale to any playable settings. Well, it was a big surprise to me, but here's the game at native 4K and low settings at 30 FPS. The shadow resolution is as bad as ever, but the rest of the game looks pretty clean. I wish I could just turn on a little anti-aliasing to clean up a few edges, but overall I'm impressed. At 4K, low settings, and 70% resolution scaling, the Masher is actually capable of 60 FPS. There are quite a few drops into the mid-50s, but the image is still surprisingly good. It's very rare that just a higher resolution can make a game look this much better, but it really cleans up the image quality. Of course, shadows are terrible and some standalone AA options would go a long way, but here you go. A half-decent budget 4K experience on a really budget PC. Mirror's Edge Catalyst is hardly a standout example of clean visuals on the PS4 and Masher, which is a shame because the game is very polished and at higher resolutions the art style really looks fantastic. The Masher takes home another win, but I can't help feeling like both are a somewhat compromised experience. I do like how the Masher scales to high resolutions, and if you can get over the shadow resolution, that's definitely worth a try on your budget machine. Go watch the Potato Masher Pro take on Mirror's Edge Catalyst if you want to see how much better the game can look. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting this channel and the Potato Masher project by tossing me a few bucks on Patreon or hit the like button. Thanks for your support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.